على من لا نبي بعد نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اقتفى أثره واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. Inshallah, we'll pick back up with reading from the book known as Tahdheeb At-Tahdheeb by Al-Hafiz Abu al-Fadl Ahmad ibn Ali, who is known as Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Ahmad ibn Ali ibn Muhammad al-Mashhur ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who died in the year 852 after the Hijrah. And we're in the section of his book where he is discussing or mentioning the biographies and the grades of people named Ahmad. People named Ahmad. And we've reached the biography or the tarjama, the evaluation, if you will, of the individual known as Ahmad ibn Abe Bakr. And so Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, Ain Ahmad ibn Abe Bakr wasmuhu al-Qasim ibn al-Harith ibn Zurara ibn Mus'ab ibn Abd al-Rahman ibn Auf Abi Mus'ab al-Zuhri al-Madani. This individual we should all know too well. And for those of us who are following along in the Muwatta of Imam Malik, for example, this is a biography that you might want to star. You might want to identify it and convert it to memory, because this is something that you should know very well. And this is Abu Mus'ab al-Zuhri, the riwayah of the Muwatta of Imam Malik that we are reading and memorizing together. Then this is that individual who transmitted it from Imam Malik. So this is the biography of Abu Mus'ab al-Zuhri, who transmitted the Muwatta from Imam Malik. Ibn Hajar, he says Ain, and we said the preface or the prefix of Ain to any biography, what does it represent? It represents that biography is in all of the 6 books. That biography is in all of the 6 books. And so he put Ain. So this narrator can be found in Bukhari, as well as Muslim, and Abu Dawood, and An-Nasa'i, and At-Tirmidhi, as well as the Sunan of Ibn Majah. He says, Ain Ahmad ibn Abe Bakr. And his name was Al-Qasim. So Abu Mus'ab al-Zuhri, his name was Ahmad. His father's kunya was Abu Bakr, but his father's actual name was Al-Qasim ibn al-Harith ibn Zurara ibn Mus'ab ibn Abd al-Rahman ibn Auf. His kunya was Abu Mus'ab. He was al-Zuhri, i.e. from the tribe of Bani Zahra, Qurashi, and he was Madani. He was from the people of Medina. From the things we benefit just by looking at his biography, Ahmad ibn Abe Bakr ibn al-Harith ibn Zurara ibn Mus'ab ibn Abd al-Rahman ibn Auf, that famous companion. Abd al-Rahman ibn Auf, one of the 10 who was promised paradise. This individual, Abu Mus'ab al-Zuhri, is from his descendants. He is from his grandchildren, right? His progeny, if you will, his descendants. They say, روى عن مالك الموطأ والدراوردي وابن أبي حازم والمغيرة بن عبد الرحمن ومحمد بن إبراهيم بن دينار خاء وجماعة. Mentioning some of his teachers, he says he narrated from Imam Malik, the Muwatta, as well as from Ad-Darawardi. Right, Ad-Darawardi is a famous scholar, as well as Ibn Abi Hazim, as well as Al-Mughira ibn Abd al-Rahman, as well as Muhammad ibn Dinar Kha. This tarjama, this particular chain, Abu Mus'ab on Muhammad ibn Ibrahim ibn Dinar, is one that you can find in Al-Bukhari, as well as a large number of scholars besides them, meaning Abu Mus'ab, Ahmad ibn Abe Bakr, Ibn al-Harith, Ibn Zurara, Ibn Mus'ab, Ibn Abd al-Rahman, Ibn Auf, is someone who narrated on a lot of individuals. They talk about his students, they say, Rawa anhu al-Jama'ah. All 6 of the people of hadith have narrated on him. Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Nasa'i, Abu Dawood, right? All 6 of them have narrated on him. And so this is a quality that is known when one of the individuals is a direct teacher of all 6, is a quality that is used to identify certain scholars of hadith. Now, Abu Mus'ab, he is not one of the 9 who all 6 of the people of hadith have narrated upon. And that is because, as Ibn Hajar says here, لَكِنَ النَّسَائِ بِوَاسِطَةِ خَيَّاطِ السُّنَّةِ. All 6 of them narrated on this individual, but Nasa'i, he narrated on Abu Mus'ab with an intermediary who was named Khayyat as-Sunnah, right? And so An-Nasa'i didn't narrate from Abu Mus'ab directly, while the rest of the 6, they narrated from Abu Mus'ab directly. And so this is what excluded him from being from one of the 9 scholars who all 6 of the people of hadith, yani Kutub Sitta, all 6 of them narrated on directly. Nasa'i is the one who excludes Abu Mus'ab from this quality, or from this group. So it says he narrated on, or they narrated from him, the entirety of the scholars of the 6 books, except that Nasa'i, he narrated on him with an intermediary of Khayyat as-Sunnah, as well as, i.e. from other individuals that narrated on Abu Mus'ab. There was Abu Ishaq al-Hashimi. He narrated the Muwatta from Abu Mus'ab. Abu Ishaq al-Hashimi is one of the people who narrated the Muwatta on Abu Mus'ab. And likewise, Baqi ibn Makhlad. Baqi ibn Makhlad is not an individual that we might find in this book, but he is a famous scholar of hadith, one of the 2 people credited with entering the hadith into Spain, right? One of the things that made Spain in a land of hadith were Muhammad ibn Waddah and Baqi ibn Makhlad. And Baqi ibn Makhlad is the individual through whom the Musannaf of of Ibn Abi Shayba has been preserved and transmitted through. And so that's another book that we go through, the Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shayba, the narrator on Ibn Abi Shayba, who we have gotten access to that book, who transmitted that book. Then it was Baqi ibn Makhlad. From the students on Abu Mus'ab as well was Abu Zur'ah and Abu Hatim. Waqala Saduq. And the 2 of them said, Abu Zur'ah and Abu Hatim al-Raziyan, and the 2 of them said about Abi Mus'ab that he was Saduq. Also from his students there was Al-Dhuhli, Muhammad ibn Yahya ibn Faris Al-Dhuhli, that famous individual, the Imam of Naysabur, as well as Zakaria As-Sijzi. And he says seen, meaning that you can find the narration of Zakaria As-Sijzi on Abi Mus'ab with Nasa'i, as well as Abdullah ibn Ahmad and other than them. So we see that Abu Mus'ab, Ahmad ibn Abe Bakr, Al-Qasim ibn Al-Harith ibn Zurara ibn Mus'ab ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, we see that this individual was one who was very famous and well known for hadith, and he was one that was sought after for narration. He had an abundance of students. After that, Ibn Hajar goes on to begin to talk about the biography of the individual. He says, قال الزبير ibn Bakkar مات وهو فقيه أهل المدينة غير مدافع أو غير مدافع. Az-Zubair ibn Bakkar said that Abu Mus'ab died and he was the scholar of Medina without any competition. Meaning when Abu Mus'ab died, he was the most knowledgeable scholar of Medina in Islamic law, Faqihu Ahl al-Medina. He was the scholar of Medina without any competition. قال سراج مات في رمضان سنة 42 و200 وله 92 سنة. As-Sarraj, he says about him that he died in Ramadan in the year 242, and he was 92 years old. right? So that means he was born in the year 150. He was born in the year 150 if he died 242 at 92 years old. So he was the twin year. He was born in the same year as Al-Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah. He was born in the year 150. So he would have died, as Sarraj mentioned, in Ramadan in the year 242. And he was 92 years old. Some of the things, just because this is a biography that is important to us, they mention about him as it relates to the Muwatta, from what we mentioned before, is that he was one of the last people to narrate the Muwatta from Imam Malik. And he was from the people of Medina as well. And so these are some of the things that give his version of the Muwatta a prestige and a higher value, because not only was he from the last of the people to narrate it, he was also from the people of Medina and their scholars. And so his narration is one that has a lot of support and a lot of witnessing to it. And it would seem to be the final version. And so that's something to be known about the riwayah of Abu Mus'ab az-Zuhri on Imam Malik, the Muwatta. Ibn Hajar, he says, adding his additions, he says, قُلْتُ وَكَذَا ذَكَرَ الْبُخَارِيُّ وَابْنُ أَبِي عَاصِمٍ وَفَاتَهُ. Ibn Hajar, he says, and this is the same that was mentioned by Al-Bukhari and Ibn Abi Asim regarding his death, i.e. that he died in Ramadan in the year 242. وقال صاحب الميزان ما أدري ما معنى قول أبي خيثمة لابنه لا تكتب عن أبي مصعب واكتب عن من شئت. انتهى. Ibn Hajar, he says, and the person who wrote Al-Mizan, we all know that is Al-Imam al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah ta'ala, the book called Mizan al-I'tidal. And from the things that are noteworthy, just getting them in passing, is that Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah ta'ala, you find in him a strong resemblance in his authorings to that which was written by Al-Imam al-Dhahabi. Very often he does something that is resembling the works of al-Dhahabi. So for example, al-Dhahabi has Mizan al-I'tidal and Ibn Hajar has Lisan al-Mizan. And so you see this desire to represent or imitate or copy, right, embody the knowledge of al-Dhahabi from Ibn Hajar. And from the stories that they mention is that Ibn Hajar, he once drunk Zamzam with the intention of having the knowledge of al-Dhahabi. And he said about himself, so I got that knowledge and more. And so Ibn Hajar is saying here that Sahib al-Mizan, al-Dhahabi, the person who wrote the book Al-Mizan, he said, I don't know what is the meaning behind the statement of Abu Khaythama to his son. Abu Khaythama, Zuhair ibn Harb, a famous scholar, he said to his son, Ahmad ibn Zuhair ibn Harb, who was another famous scholar. Al-Dhahabi is saying, I don't know the meaning of the statement of Abi Khaythama to his son. Don't write anything from Abi Mus'ab, and you can write from whoever else besides him you want. I.e., it's as if Abu Khaythama is criticizing and deeming Abu Mus'ab to be weak. Don't write anything from him, and you can write from whoever else you want besides him. And Al-Dhahabi is commenting on this, saying, I don't know what this statement means. Like, why would he say such a statement? Now, Ibn Hajar, he goes on to say, he says, وَيَحْتَمِلُ أَنْ يَكُونَ مَرَادُ أَبِي خَيْثَمَ دَخُولَهُ فِي الْقَضَاءِ أَوْ إِكْثَارُهُ مِنَ الْفَتْوَى بِالرَّأْيِ. Ibn Hajar, he says, and it is possible that the intent of Abu Khaythama was because of how Abu Mus'ab became a judge, or his abundance of giving fatwas based on his opinion. And this is something that you would find amongst the Salaf. So Ibn Hajar here is trying to find some validation or some aspect of justification from the statement of Abu Khaythama. Because here we have Abu Khaythama, who was a scholar of hadith and a scholar of people, criticizing Abu Mus'ab. And it would seem for no reason. And so why would he do such a thing? And this is one of the things that you find. Sometimes there'll be disagreement amongst the scholars about a person. And these are from the things that we can benefit from. And here, Ibn Hajar is trying to find some aspect to validate the statement of Abi Khaythama. And so he says maybe the criticism is because Abu Mus'ab became a judge. And this is something that often happens in the past, or often happened in the past, is that when someone will become a judge, their narrating of hadith would become lesser and their quality would be less because they were preoccupied with the role of being a judge. In addition, working for the state, sometimes it would cast aspersions on their reliability, because the state, if it had impermissible sources or something like that, and a person is on the payroll of the state, it would cast aspersions with some of them. And so Ibn Hajar is saying maybe the criticism of Abu Khaythama is because Abu Mus'ab became a judge, because he was the judge of the people of Medina, right? From his roles that he served, he was the judge, the Qadhi of Medina, right? And being the Qadhi of an area was an important role and a prestigious role. And so Abu Khaythama is saying, Ibn Hajar is saying, maybe the reason why Abu Khaythama didn't want his son to write the hadith of this individual was because he had entered into becoming a judge. And as we said, when you become a judge, your ability to narrate becomes less because your time is more restrained, as well as the quality of what you narrate suffers because an individual is preoccupied with their duties, which could lead to a weakness in their narration. And then in addition to that, sometimes a person, when becoming a judge, could be corrupted by the dunya. And so those are things that the scholars might avoid if possible in certain circumstances. Ibn Hajar, he says, "Oh, iktharuhu min al-fatwa bil-ra'i." Another reason why he might have, i.e. Abu Khaythama might have made this criticism, was because Abu Mus'ab would often give verdicts. He would give fatwa, not qadha, not judgments, but verdicts with his opinion. And this was during the time where there were two major disciplines: madhhabu ahl al-hadith wa madhhabu ahl al-ra'i, or madrasatu ahl al-hadith wa madrasatu al-ra'i. The school or the way of thinking of the people of hadith and the way of thinking of the people of ra'i. And if an individual came and asked a question or needed an answer, you would find that the people of hadith would often restrict themselves to just narrating whatever was transmitted in that topic. While the people of ra'i, they might do their own ijtihad or their own analogies and comparisons to arrive at a result. In the early Salaf, there was a large group of them who used to dislike ar-ra'i. And to get a better clarification about the details of this and the different types of ra'i, the different types of opinion, the praiseworthy opinion, the criticized opinion, when is it allowed, when is it not allowed, a good book to look in for that is the beginning of I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in by Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala. He has a good conversation regarding ar-ra'i, or opinion in the religion, and when is it permissible, when is it not, and the details surrounding that. But this might be one of the reasons why Abu Khaythama criticized Abu Mus'ab, Ahmad ibn Abe Bakr al-Qasim ibn al-Harith ibn Zurara ibn Mus'ab ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. One of the reasons he might have criticized him was because he would often give verdicts with his opinion. Now, Ibn Hajar, he goes on, he says, وَقَالَ الْحَاكِمْ كان فقيها متقشفا عالما بمذاهب أهل المدينة. Al-Hakim said about him that he was an individual who was a faqih. He was a scholar of Islamic law and jurisprudence. And he was mutaqashifan. Mutaqashifan, I understand from that word, like away from the dunya. He did not engage in, the enjoyments of the dunya. But let's get a proper translation of it. Mutaqashifan. Okay, here Ibn al-Manzur, he says وَرَجُلٌ مُتَقَشِّفًا is one who has left off cleanliness and is not concerned with their appearance. He says وَفِي الْحَدِيث رَأَى رَجُلًا قَشِفَ الْهَيْئَةِ أي تَارِكًا لِلْغَسْلِ. والمتقشف الذي يتبلغ بالقوت وبالمرقع. Naam. And it's also from the shiddat al-aish, right? A person who, he says, وَالضَّيْقِ الْعَيْشِ يُقَالُ أَصْحَابُ مِنَ الْعَيْشِ ضَفَفْتُ وَخَفَفْتُ وَقَشَفْتُ كُلَّ هَذَا مِنْ شِدَّةِ الْعَيْشِ. Right? So he was disheveled. He was an individual who was disheveled. And you can infer that disheveledness from aestheticism and being away from the dunya or whatever. But he was a disheveled individual who was very knowledgeable about Islamic law, and he was very knowledgeable about the different modes of thinking or the different opinions of the scholars of Medina, right? He understood very well and was well acquainted with the different views of the scholars of Medina. Now, Ibn Hajar, he says, وَكَذَا ذَكَرَ ابْنُ حِبَّانَ وَكَذَا ذَكَرَ ابْنُ حِبَّانَ فِي الثِّقَاتِ. This is the same thing that was mentioned by Ibn Hibban in his book, Al-Thiqat, the righteous and reliable people. He says, وَقَالَ ابْنُ حَزْمٍ فِي مُوَطَّئِهِ زِيَادَةٌ عَلَى مِئَةِ حَدِيثٍ. Ibn Hazm, Ibn Hazm, that famous scholar, al-Zahiri, al-Andalusi, he said about Abu Mus'ab's Muwatta that it has about 100 extra narrations in it, i.e. that aren't in the version of Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi, right? He says that the version of Abu Mus'ab has about 100 additional narrations in it. This was the statement of Ibn Hazm. Ibn Hajar, he says, وَقَدَّمَهُ الدَّارَقُطْنِي فِي الْمُوَطَّى عَلَى يَحْيَى بْنِ بُكَيْرٍ. He says, in Ad-Daraqutni preferred Abu Mus'ab, he preferred the Muwatta of Abu Mus'ab over that of Yahya ibn Bukayr. Yahya ibn Bukayr was another scholar, an Egyptian scholar who narrated the Muwatta, and Ad-Daraqutni preferred the Muwatta of Abu Mus'ab over the Muwatta of Yahya ibn Bukayr. Ibn Hajar, he says, وَفِي الزَّهْرَةِ روى عنه خا تسعة ومسلم ثلاثة. And in that book that we've talked about, that I still didn't go back to get the details of it, that book entitled Az-Zahra, it states that he narrated, or that Bukhari narrated 9 hadith from this individual, and that Muslim narrated 3. So this individual, Abu Mus'ab az-Zuhri, Bukhari narrated 9 hadith from this individual, and Muslim narrated 3. And like I say, this is a biography that you might want to check and circle and highlight. This is one of the more famous individuals to be acquainted with. The next biography, he says, Qala, Qaf, he says, Qaf, Ahmad ibn Thaabit al-Jahdari Abu Bakr al-Basri. So this individual, his hadith can be found with Qaf, and we said Qaf was Ibn Majah, and his name was Ahmad ibn Thaabit al-Jahdari. Al-Jahdari with a fatha on the jim as well as a sukoon on the ha without a dot, followed by a dal without a dot and a ra. Then this is attributing of a person to Jahdar, and this was mentioned by As-Sam'ani. Right, an individual who was named Jahdar, when somebody is from that individual, from the progeny of that individual, they would call the individual Al-Jahdari. His kunya was Abu Bakr, and he was from the people of Basra. He was from the people of Basra. He says, روى عن سفيان بن عيينة وعبد الوهاب الثقفي وغندر والقطان وغيرهم. From the teachers of this individual, Ahmad ibn Thaabit, there was Sufyan ibn Uyayna, right? Sufyan ibn Uyayna, the Imam of Mecca of his time, the teacher of one of the teachers of Ash-Shafi'i, from the scholars of Hadith, as well as Abdul Wahhab al-Thaqafi, as well as Gundar, right? Muhammad ibn Ja'far, the companion of Shu'bah, as well as Qattan, yani Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan, and other than them. So this individual had a lot of amazing teachers. He said, وَرَوَى عَنْهُ ابن ماجه وَالْبُخَارِي فِي التَّارِيخِ وَابْنُ صَاعِدْ وَأَبُو عَرُوبَةَ وَعُمْرُ بْنُ بُجَيْرٍ وَابْنُ خُزَيْمَةَ وَأَبُو بَكْرِ بْنُ أَبِي دَاوُود وَغَيْرُهُم. He said, and from the people that this individual, that narrated on this individual, right, from the students of this individual, there was Ibn Majah, as well as al-Bukhari in his book, Tariq, his book of history or biographies. Also from this individual students was Ibn Sa'id and Ibn Aruba and Abu Aruba, as well as Umar ibn Bujayr and Ibn Khuzaymah. Right, so we see that even the younger generation was able to catch this individual. So this individual connects a big gap. We can already tell that this individual, he must have lived a long time, because Sufyan ibn Uyayna, he died in the year 197, 198, and Ibn Khuzaymah, he died in the year 311. So between their deaths, there's over 110 years. And so we see how this individual, the younger students, even the students of Bukhari and them, were able to catch up to their teacher through the likes of this individual, Ahmad ibn Thaabit. Likewise, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawood, right? Abu Dawood's son, Abdullah, whose kunya was Abu Bakr, he was able to be a student of this individual, Ahmad ibn Thaabit, as well as other than them. And for this reason, Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَكَانَ حَيًّا فِي سَنَةِ خَمْسِينَ وَمِئَتَيْنِ. This individual was still alive in the year 250. Right? So this individual was still alive in the year 250. Ibn Hajar, he says, قلت قال ابن حبان في الثقات كان مستقيم الأمر في الحديث. Ibn Hajar says that Ibn Hibban said regarding this person in his book Al-Thiqat that he was straight in his affair regarding hadith. Right? He was straight in his affair regarding hadith. He was one who was accurate in regarding his narration of hadith. This was the statement of Ibn Hibban. Ibn Hajar, he goes on to say, he says, وَذَكَرَهُ أَبُو عَلِي الْغَسَّانِي فِي شُيُوخِ داود في شيوخ أبي داود وقال إنه روى عنه في كتاب بدء الوحي له. Ibn Hajar says that Abu Ali al-Ghassani has mentioned this individual, Ahmad ibn Thaabit al-Jahdari. He says that Abu Ali al-Ghassani mentions this individual amongst the teachers of Abu Dawood. And he said about him that Abu Dawood narrated on him in his book, The Beginning of Creation. Right? Abu Dawood had a book known as Bad al-Wahi. The Beginning of Revelation. The Beginning of Revelation. And in that book, you can find that Abu Dawood narrated on this individual. And that's the end of the biography of Ahmad ibn Thaabit al-Jahdari. So we don't know exactly when he was born. We just see that his teachers reached the Tabi'in in Sufyan ibn Uyayna, and his students reach the students of the generation of Bukhari and Abi Dawood. And so this individual had a long span and a long life of narrating. And he was alive, according to Ibn Hajar and other than him, sometime even until 250. The next person that they mention, he says, Mim Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Ma'kiri, Abu al-Hasan Nazil Mecca, wa Ma'kir Nahiyatun min al-Yemen. He says Mim, and as we all know, the prefix Mim represents what book? Naam, Sahih Muslim. This individual's name was Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Ma'kiri, whose kunya was Abu al-Hasan, who became a resident of Medina. And Ibn Hajar, he says the word Ma'kir, which this person was attributed to, Ma'kiri, i.e. he was from Ma'kir, he says it's an area in Yemen. It is an area in Yemen. And some of them pronounce it Mu'qar or Mu'akkir or Mu'akkar. Some of them pronounce it Mu'akkar. But like this, the precision of the harakats here says Ma'qar or Ma'kir, and some of them pronounce it Mu'akkar. But either way, this individual, Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Ma'kiri or al-Mu'akkari, And al-Ma'qir is an area in Yemen. From this individual's teachers, they say, روى عن النضر ibn Muhammad Mim, وإسماعيل ibn عبد الكريم ibn معقل ibn منبه. From this individual's teachers was An-Nadhr ibn Muhammad, and you can find that with Muslim, as well as Ismail ibn Abdul Karim ibn Ma'qil ibn Munabbih. He says, وروى عنه Muslim والمفضل ibn Muhammad al-Janadi ومحمد ibn Ishaq ibn al-Abbas al-Fakihi al-Makki. From his students, there was Muslim, i.e. Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj, as well as al-Mufaddal ibn Muhammad al-Janadi, as well as the individual known as al-Mufaddal ibn Muhammad al-Janadi, as well as Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn al-Abbas al-Fakihi, who was from Mecca. Ibn Hajar, he says that this individual was alive, كان حيا سنة 55 و200. This person was still alive in the year 255. This person was still alive in the year 255. He says, وذكر عبد الغني في ترجمته أنه روى عن سعيد بن بشير وقيس بن الربيع وهو وهم فإنه لم يدركهما. He says that Abdul Ghani, yani Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi, right, from the famous scholars, the cousin of Ibn Qudama, the one who wrote the book Umdatul Ahkam, he said that he said, mentioning this person's biography, that he is somebody who narrated on Sa'id ibn Bashir, right? So when you go back to Kamal, because Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi is the one who wrote Kamal, he says that this individual, Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Ma'qiri, Abu al-Hasan, he narrated on Sa'id ibn Bashir as well as Qais ibn Rabi'. But Ibn Hajar and others say that this is an error. This is a mistake from Abdul Ghani, because this person didn't reach those two individuals. He never met those two individuals. Ibn Hajar, he says, إِنَّمَا رَوَى النَّظَرْ عَنْهُمَا. But in reality, it was him narrating on another, i.e. his teacher, on the two of them, i.e. Sa'id ibn Bashir and Qais ibn Rabi'. So this individual, he never actually narrated on Sa'id ibn Bashir or Qais ibn Rabi', but instead he narrated on his teacher, An-Nadhr ibn Muhammad, on the two of them. Why do we mention these details? And somebody might get bored when they're not engrossed in these details, but this just shows you the precision of the scholars of hadith in preserving information. You're reading a book. This book has a bunch of people's names in it before you get to the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you need to make a determination about that hadith of the Prophet. Is it valid or invalid? And you see this individual, Ahmad ibn Ja'far, and he's narrating on a reliable scholar named Sa'id ibn Bashir. And you think to yourself, oh, hadith is authentic. But unless you study hadith, you wouldn't know that that has a subtle flaw. And this is an example of what they talk about when they talk about an illah, right? A hidden weakness. That when we go back to the biographies, we find that this person never really narrated from Sa'id ibn Bashir. So if you see a narration that looks like that, you automatically know that it is an error. And so you're trying to figure out, where is the error from? Is the error from the manuscript? Is the error from one of the narrators? And here Ibn Hajar is telling you that when you see this type of narration, the reality of it is that Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Ma'qiri is narrating on his teacher, An-Nadhr ibn Muhammad. And so that's why these details become important. Ibn Hajar, he goes on to say, he says, Al-Lalaka'i said about this person, right? Here goes another person from the names of the books that we're going over, right? You see how these things, they start to connect. Al-Lalaka'i, Abu al-Qasim, Hibatullah ibn al-Hasan ibn Mansur al-Lalaka'i, who did Sharh Usul I'tiqadi Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And so you see the prestige of this scholar, that he's being mentioned from the people who were those who verified and evaluated people. And so Ibn Hajar is saying about this person that Al-Lalaka'i said about him that his kunya was Abu Ahmed. right? We said that his kunya was Abu al-Hasan, but al-Lalaka'i said that this person, Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Ma'qiri, his kunya was Abu Ahmed. Ibn Hajar, he goes on to say, he says, وَفِي الزَّهْرَةِ رَوَى عَنْهُ مُسْلِمْ أَرْبَعَةً. In the book Az-Zahra, it's mentioned that Muslim narrated 4 hadith from this individual, Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Ma'qiri, right? Al-Nazil Mecca. He was from the people who ended up taking up residency in Mecca. Then Ibn Hajar, he mentions a person for the sake of distinction, to differentiate between this Ahmad ibn Ja'far, who is from the scholars of the 6 books, and there's another Ahmad ibn Ja'far who is of the same generation but is not in the 6 books. And so don't get the 2 of them confused. So Ibn Hajar is going to mention this person's biography so you can know who he is, so you don't think that he is the one that you might see in the 6 books. And so this is what he says, tamyiz, for clarification or for distinction. Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Hulwani al-Bazzaz. There's another individual known as Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Hulwani. Well, Hulwan is a area in وهي آخر حد عرض سواد عراق مما يلي الجبال. It's on the border lands of Iraq, which lays, next to the mountains. This area known as Hulwan. And let's see if we can see where it is at today. Hulwan. Nam Hulwan, and they pronounce it in English as Hilwan or Hilwan. No, that's in Egypt, so that's the wrong one. One al-Iraq. And see, this is why when it comes to looking up lands, historic lands, you have to know where they are. And that's why the books like Al-Buldan by Al-Hamawi or something like that, or Al-Ansab by Sam'ani become important, because nowadays the lands or the names of the cities might be in other places than they used to be anciently, or they might be different things than they used to be classically. And so if you look up the name Hulwan, it's always going to pop up with Egypt right now. But Hulwan al-Iraq is presently on the border of Iraq and Iran. It's on the borders of Iraq and Iran, and it is close to the city nowadays that is known as As-Sa'diyah or Jalola or Khaniqain, right? These are areas in Iraq that it is close to. So it's on the border of Iraq and Iran, Al-Hulwan, with the Dhamma. And so this individual, who's not from the scholars of the 6, his name is Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Hulwani. And Hulwan with the Dhamma on the letter with no dot, and then a sukoon on the lam, and then a noon after it, a waw and an aleph, attributing him to the land of Hulwan, which is like the last towns on the borders of Iraq from what is close to the mountains. And he was known as Al-Bazzaz. And Al-Bazzaz, as we mentioned before, this is an individual who sells silk garments or who sells these type of garments. Al-Bazzaz, he sells Al-Baz. And Baz, as we mentioned, Bazzaz. And there's a lot of people who are known as Bazzaz. And so you want to know these words because you'll come across biographies of individuals who you want to know what these things are. Al-Bazzaz is an individual who sells garments, the clothing, the sale, the what do you call a garment seller? A garment seller. What's the word I'm looking for? A garment merchant, right? He would sell clothes. So this individual who is not from the 6, but has the same name and generation as the other Ahmad ibn Ja'far, his name is Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Hulwani al-Bazzaz. He says that from his teachers, he narrated on Ja'far ibn Aoun and Abi Asim, Nabil, right? So his teachers were Ja'far ibn Aoun and Abi Asim. And these are two names that, if you remember, in Al-Lalaka'i, he mentioned those names. These are famous scholars. He says, قال ibn Hibban في الثقات, excuse me, Ibn Hibban, he said about this individual in his book, Al-Thiqat, that Muhammad ibn Musayyib narrated to us on the authority of this individual, and he was an individual who was, his affair was straight in hadith, right? His affairs were straight in hadith. He was somebody who was accurate in hadith. So both these Ahmad ibn Ja'fars are somebody who were, inshallah, reliable. Even though when we look at the previous biography, there's no mention of the person's reliability or lack thereof. All that is mentioned is that Muslim narrated on this person. And so that's where we're deriving our sense of reliability on the previous Ahmad ibn Ja'far Abul Hasan al-Maqili, the fact that Muslim narrated on him. Because if not, there's no other mentioning about the reliability of the previous Ahmad ibn Ja'far. We have three more biographies to go. He says, Mim Dal Sin. Ahmad ibn Janab ibn al-Mughira, Ahmad ibn Janab ibn al-Mughira, or Ahmad ibn Janab ibn al-Mughira al-Missisi, Abu al-Walid al-Hadathi, yuqalu innahu Baghdadi al-Asl. So this next individual, he says, Mim Dal Sin. Mim Dal Sin. This individual can be found in Muslim, as well as Abu Dawood, as well as An-Nasa'i. What was his name? His name was Ahmad ibn Janab ibn al-Mughira al-Missisi. Al-Missisi, right? And Al-Missis, or Al-Missisa, is a land in that is on the borders of the Sham River, right? The river, I'm not the river, the Sea of the Levant, right? The Levant Sea. And if I'm not mistaken, the Levant Sea is a portion of the Mediterranean Sea. Bahr al-Sham. Bahr al-Sham. Right, yeah. Bahr al-Sham, the Levantian Sea is what they call it in English. And it's a portion of the Mediterranean Sea that is to the north of Egypt and south of Turkey. That area where Cyprus or Qubros is in, they call that Bahr al-Sham. And it's just part of the Mediterranean Sea. So this individual is from a town known as Al-Missisa. And Al-Missisa nowadays, if I'm not mistaken, it's in Lebanon, Al-Missisa. In English, they call it Iski Mises, which is so it's in Turkey. It's in southern Turkey. Yes, that's right. It's in southern Turkey. Al-Missisa is a land that is in southern Turkey, right, on the borders of the Mediterranean Sea, Al-Missisa. And it's a famous city, right? And it just shows you how far Islam had reached, that this individual, Ahmad ibn Janab ibn al-Mughira al-Missisi, Abu al-Walid al-Hadathi, was from this area, Missisa. And his kunya was Abu al-Walid. Ahmad ibn Janab ibn al-Mughira, his kunya was Abu al-Walid. And he was known as al-Hadathi. And al-Hadathi, with a fatha on the ha and the dal, without the dots, is an affiliation to Al-Hadath, which is a castle between Maltiya wa Shamshata wa Mar'ash, right? It's an affiliation to this castle that is in between the lands of Maltiya, right? Malta is that island. What is it? That island, Malta. It's not Mali. What is it? The Maltese, right? Malta is that island. If I'm not mistaken, the Maltese, right? No, Malatia. In English, they call it Malatia in Turkey. Multi. And so there's a castle that is in between Multi as well as Shamshat. And Shamshat obviously is also going to be in Turkey. Al-Armenia, right? So all of this is areas in eastern Turkey. And there was a castle there that was known as Al-Hadath. And so this individual is attributed to that castle, Ahmad ibn Janaab ibn al-Mughira al-Misisi, whose kunya was Abu al-Walid al-Hadathi. And he was also said to be originally from Baghdad. It is said about him that he was originally from Baghdad. From his teachers, he says, Rawa an Isa ibn Yunus, or Isa ibn Yunus, wal Hakim ibn Zahir, wa ghayrihima. From his teachers were Isa ibn Yunus and Al Hakim ibn Zahir, and other than the two of them. And from the people that narrated from him, from his students, he says, Wa anhu Muslimun, wa Abu Dawood, wa Nasa'i, biwasitati Ya'qub ibn Shaybah, wa Sa'iqah, wa Abu Zur'ah, wa Uthman ibn Kharrazad, Seen. والدوري وكتب عنه أحمد بن حنبل وابنه عبد الله وآخر من روى عنه أحمد بن الحسن بن عبد الجبار الصوفي. He says from his students there was Muslim and Abu Dawood as well as An-Nasa'i by way of an intermediary of Ya'qub ibn Shaybah, meaning Nasa'i narrates on Ya'qub, who narrates on Ahmad ibn Janab, as well as Sa'iqah, as well as Abu Zur'ah, as well as Uthman ibn Kharrazad. And you can find that with Seen, i.e. with Nasa'i, as well as the Duri, and he also, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and his son Abdullah also wrote narrations from this individual, Ahmad ibn Janab. And the last person to narrate from this individual was Ahmad ibn al-Hasan ibn Abdul Jabbar as-Sufi. This was the last person to narrate. The last student that we have record of this individual was Ahmad ibn al-Hasan ibn Abdul Jabbar as-Sufi. They say, Qala Salihu Jazara Saduq. Salihu Jazara said about this individual that he was reliable. He was right. He was an honest person. وقال ابن أبي عاصم مات سنة 30 و200. Ibn Abi Asim said about this person that he died in the year 230. This individual died in the year 230. Ibn Hajar, he says, قلت نقل الذهبي أن آخر من روى عنه أبو يعلى الموصلي. Ibn Hajar says that al-Dhahabi transmits that the last student of this individual was actually Abu Ya'la al-Mawsili. Abu Ya'la al-Mawsili was the famous scholar who wrote the Musnad, that is well known, Musnad Abi Ya'la. They mention in the footnotes, they say that لم أقف على ذلك في المطبوع من تذهيب التهذيب وكتب الأخرى. In the footnotes, they say they can't find this statement of al-Dhahabi in any of the current books that we have that have been authored by al-Dhahabi. They can't find this statement. So this is a statement of Ibn Hajar that we don't have access to from the statements of al-Dhahabi, saying that Abu Ya'la al-Mawsili was the last person to narrate from this individual. He says, قال الحاكم ثقة. Al-Hakim, al-Naysaburi, he said that this individual was thiqah, righteous and reliable. وذكره ابن حبان في الثقات. And Ibn Hibban mentioned this person in his book, الثقات. He says, وقال ابن أبي حاتم روى عنه أبي وقال هو الصدوق. Ibn Abi Hatim, he said that my father narrated from this individual. And he said about him that he was right, he was honest. So we see that this individual, Ahmad ibn Janab al-Misisi, Abu al-Walid, is somebody who was reliable, right? And that's seen, that Muslim narrated on him. The next narration or the next biography, he says, Mim Dal, Ahmad ibn Jawwaas al-Hanafi, Abu Asim al-Kufi. So when he says Mim Dal, we already know that's Muslim and Abu Dawood. Who is this person's name? Ahmad ibn Jawwaas al-Hanafi. His name was Ahmad ibn Jawwaas al-Hanafi. And Allah knows best, the affiliation of Al-Hanafi here is the affiliation to the tribe. I'm sorry, to the madhab, Al-Hanafi, right? Because if he was Bani Hanifa, it would be Al-Hanifi, if I'm not mistaken. But here, Al-Hanafi, Allah knows best, it might be an affiliation to the madhab of Abi Hanifa. He says Abu Asim was his kunya. His kunya was Abu Asim al-Kufi. He was from the people of Kufa. He says, روى عن أبي الأحوص وعبد الله بن إدريس وابن المبارك وأبو معاوية وأبي بكر بن عياش وغيرهم. From his teachers, there was Abu al-Ahwas, as well as Abdullah ibn Idris, as well as Ibn al-Mubarak, as well as Abu Muawiyah, as well as Abu Bakr ibn Ayyash, and other than them. So he had a lot of famous teachers. From his students, he says, روى عنه مسلم وأبو داود وأبو زرعة وابن وارة وأحسن الثناء عليه وأبو بكر الأثرم والحسن بن سفيان وغيرهم. Excuse me. From those who narrated from this individual, there was Muslim, as well as Abu Dawood, as well as Abu Zur'ah, as well as Ibn Wara, another famous scholar of hadith who has books that reached us. And Ibn Wara, Ahsan al-Thana Ali, he spoke very highly of this person. And Abu Bakr al-Athram and Al-Hasan ibn Sufyan and other than them, right? So this individual, not only did he have very famous and prominent teachers, he had very famous and prominent students. And that's always a good sign. They say, قال مطيّن مات لثلاث خلون من المحرم سنة 38 و200 ثقة. Mutayyan was another scholar of hadith. He said about this person that he died 3 days into the month of Muharram. He died on the 3rd of Muharram in the year 238. And this individual was thiqah. This was the statement of Mutayyan. He died in the year 238 and he was thiqah, right? Extremely righteous and reliable. Ibn Hajar, he says, قلت ذكره ابن حبان في الثقات. Ibn Hibban mentions him in his book الثقات. وروى عنه بقي بن مخلد وقال إنه لم يحدث إلا عن ثقة. He says also from the things that are notable is that Baqi ibn Makhlad narrated on this individual. And Baqi ibn Makhlad, he is one who said about himself that he would not narrate on anybody unless they were reliable, right? Any teacher that Baqi ibn Makhlad had, that person had to be somebody who was reliable in Baqi ibn Makhlad's opinion. So this is another confirmation of or support, a statement of praise regarding this person that Baqi ibn Makhlad narrated on this individual. Naam. Ibn Hajar, he says, and in the book Az-Zahra, it says that Muslim narrated 5 hadith on this individual, right? There are 5 hadith in Sahih Muslim from this individual. Naam. The last narration, he says he mentions it for the sake of distinction again. There's another Ahmad ibn Jawwaas who was other than Ahmad ibn Jawwaas al-Hanafi, Abu Asim al-Kufi. There's another one of the same generation who was not in the 6 books. So he says, Tamyiz Ahmad ibn Jawwaas al-Ustawa'i Abu Ja'far. For the sake of distinction, there is Ahmad ibn Jawwaas al-Ustawa'i. Wal Ustawa with a dhamma on the alif and a sukoon on the sin and a fatha on the ta, or you can put a dhamma, Ustuwa'i or Ustawa'i, is an affiliation to Ustawa, and it is a area inside of Naysabur, which has an abundance, which has many villages and good that is in that place. Right, Ustawa is an area. It's a region of Naysabur, and Naysabur itself is a region that is in between Afghanistan and Iran. Right, it's shared between Afghanistan and Iran, and that region has a section known as Ustawa or Ustuwa, and that's where this individual was from. Abu Ahmad ibn Jawwaas al-Ustawa'i. His kunya was Abu Ja'far. His kunya was Abu Ja'far. He says from the people that he narrated from his teachers, there was Yahya ibn Yahya and Ismail ibn Abi Uwais and other than them. Right? Yahya ibn Yahya and Naysaburi from the people that narrated the Muwatta, as well as Ismail ibn Abi Uwais from the relatives of Imam Malik as well, right? Well, other than them. He says, and from his students there was Abu Muhammad ibn Sharqi, wa Musa ibn al-Abbas al-Juwayni. From his students there was Abu Muhammad ibn al-Sharqi, as well as Musa ibn al-Abbas al-Juwayni. وذكره الحاكم في تاريخ نيسابور. He says in Al-Hakim, he mentioned this individual amongst the people in his book of history of Naysabur. Right, so if you want to find more about the biography of this Ahmad ibn Jawwaas al-Ustawa'i Abu Ja'far, then his biography, you can find him being mentioned in the history of Naysabur. And as we mentioned, those are good books to take advantage of, right? When a scholar of hadith writes a book regarding the history of his city, it's a book you want to purchase and take advantage of, like Tariq Baghdad, Tariq Dimashq, Tariq Naysabur, Samarkand. All of these books, they'll talk about the history of the city and its founding, its origins, as well as the scholars that passed through that area. And so it's a good place to get the biography of various scholars and to know who the scholars of any given area was. Ibn Hajar, he says about this biography of Ahmad ibn Jawwaas al-Ustawa'i, he says, I mention him for the sake of distinction. This individual is not in the 6 books, but he has a similar name to Ahmad ibn Jawwaas al-Hanafi, Abu Asim al-Kufi, and they're from the same generation. So I wanted you to know the difference between the two of them. And like this, we finished up until the point of everybody who their name is Ahmed, and they're the son of somebody that their name begins with the Jeen. Next time, inshallah, we'll pick up with Ahmad ibn al-Hajjaj al-Bakri. And like this, we're moving along. We've covered 24 biographies up until now. And from the biographies that we've covered, there have been maybe 2 that are like ones that you want to circle and underline. Ad-Dawraqi, Ahmad ibn Ibrahim ad-Dawraqi, Ahmad ibn Ibrahim ibn Kathir ibn Zayd ad-Dawraqi, as well as Ahmad ibn Abi Bakr al-Qasim ibn al-Harith ibn Zurara ibn Mus'ab ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. So far, these are 2 of the ones that you might want to put a circle or a star next to. If obviously it's hard work memorizing all these people, and it's not something that is even expected, right? It's not something that an individual would listen to an audio or read a book or read a chapter once and memorize all of these people. But just to be familiar with them, and then the more you read the books of hadith, the more you engage. Every time you go back and you see a biography, you look at it again. And this is from the good things that the Sheikh Muhammad Adam al-Ethiopi, he did in his explanations. Every time he would cross a biography, he would repeat it again. So you get very familiar with it. But so far, there have been 2 that you really want to, buckle down with and focus on. And that is Ad-Dawraqi and Abu Mus'ab al-Zuhri. So we'll stop at that amount. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. وفيكم بارك الله. How many scholars imitated another in their scholarly works or statements? There are a lot of examples of that. There are a lot of examples of that where a scholar would see the actions of another scholar and, try to replicate or imitate his work. And you know what they say, imitation is the highest sign of flattery, right? And this is even going back to the books of the scholars of hadith. How many books of hadith do we have where their main goal was to copy the work that was done by their teacher? So you have like the Mustakhraj of Ibn Abi Awana, right? And other books, the Mustakhraj of Abu Nu'aym al-Asfahani, or other books, right? There's so many Mustakhrajat where a scholar of hadith tries to replicate the book of his teacher without using his teacher. Some of them even say that the Sahih of Muslim is nothing more than a Mustakhraj on Sahih Bukhari, right? And then outside of that, sometimes they might try to replicate somebody's work as competition, right? Like you find between like Ibn Hajar and Badruddin al-Aini, right? Badruddin al-Aini wrote his explanation of Sahih Bukhari almost as a competition with Ibn Hajar. So Umdatul Qari is almost as a competition to Fath al-Bari. And that's why you find that Ibn Badruddin al-Aini, rahimahullah ta'ala, when he talks about, and some of them say in his explanation of Bukhari, he's referring to Ibn Hajar, right? And then he'll often follow that up with criticism. And then Ibn Hajar, refuted him back in another book and things like that. And so you'll find that a lot, whether they do it out of flattery and, a desire to replicate their knowledge, or whether they do it as a challenge in a way to kind of refute them by producing a book in their opinion that is accurate, as opposed, like another good example of this is Al-Bayhaqi and At-Tahawi, Abu Ja'far At-Tahawi, right? Abu Ja'far At-Tahawi, the one who wrote that Aqidah At-Tahawiyya, he has a book called Ma'ani al-Athar or Sharh Mushkil al-Hadith. I think it's Mushkil al-Hadith, that he is basically refuting the Shafi'i madhab and supporting the Hanafi madhab. And Al-Bayhaqi goes on and writes Ma'rifat al-Sunani wal-Athar as a refutation of his book, like kind of responding to it, copying it, but supporting the Shafi'i madhab. And like this, it's often done. It's often done. So these are good things. And we do it to this day, right? You can look, like, for example, Sheikh Rabi Hafidhullah and Sheikh Muqbil, right? And their Sheikh Muqbil's work on the Sahih of Imam Muslim, right? And there's representation and reflection and imitation to some extent. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's done for, like we say, reasons of flattery, reasons of challenging and competition, or to prove the truth in their view. Sometimes it's done to promote information amongst a group of people who would not usually accept it from the original author. So, for example, I might know that there are a group of people in my area who don't listen to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. So I'll write Thalathatul Usul and put my name on it. And if I know that they'll listen to me, then I'll write something similar or copy his book. And not for the sake of plagiarism and like passing his work off on mine, but for the sake of allowing this information to be spread amongst the people who would normally reject it just because of the name of the author. So there's a lot of times where these type of things are done, but more often it's done as flattery, or done to, fill a gap that was made by the previous author. And that's why you see that so many books, there's often a series that comes off of that book. Any valuable book in Islam, most often you'll find that there'll be a series of works that stem from that book. And so that's something to familiarize yourself with, right? So-and-so wrote a book, and so-and-so summarized it, and so-and-so explained the summarization, and then so-and-so combined it with another book, and then so-and-so summarized or explained that combination. And like this, so-and-so turned it into poetry, so-and-so made a refutation. You want to find the series of works that are done surrounding any given book. Now, he says, how many of the scholars, we did that, all of the scholars, all of these scholars are scholars of hadith. All of these people are people of hadith. It does not necessarily mean that they are all scholars, but the people in this book are all people who you can find in one of the or more of the Kutub al-Sitta, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Nasa'i, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, or their secondary books. And what we mean by secondary, i.e. books that they're not as popular for. So all of these authors, they have other books that they wrote, and so they include the biographies of the people that are in those books as well. And we mentioned all of this in the introduction. If you go back to the first and the second recordings in this series, you'll find the purpose of this book and the benefit that can be gotten from it. So not everybody in here is a scholar of hadith. Some of the people in here will be liars, or if not to the level of liars, then weak in their narrations and not acceptable. But the vast majority of them will be reliable and acceptable, because the vast majority of the people in the 6 books are reliable and acceptable. But not all of them are scholars of hadith. And it includes people from the Sahaba all the way down to their teachers. Question we missed. All of these ulama you are mentioning are from Medina? No, some of them are from Medina, like Abu Mus'ab az-Zuhri was from Medina. But others were from Mecca, like, or who ended up living in Mecca, like, who was it? Ahmad ibn Thaabit. He ended up living in Mecca, if I'm not mistaken, right? Ahmad ibn Thaabit, Nazir Mecca, Ahmad ibn Thaabit al-Jahdari, al-Basri. No, not Ahmad ibn Thaabit, Ahmad ibn Ja'far al-Ma'qili from Yemen. He ended up living in Mecca. And you have Ahmad ibn Thaabit was from Basra, right? And I think we saw that all of these individuals, they were from different places. And it's important to recognize where they were from and where they ended up at, so you can know kind of what chain they're in. What scholars did they take from and what scholars did they teach? Because their location will show that, right? If you know a person's biography, you know that Abdul Hakim, for example, lived in St. Louis. He lived in Philadelphia. He lived in Mecca. He lived in Medina. He lived in Kuwait, or he visited Kuwait often. And so you know, okay, I know what timelines he was here and there. I can kind of get an idea of who he met because of all of that. And I can kind of get an idea of who might have met him because of all of that, right? If somebody's from St. Louis in 2024, the first question you would ask is, did you meet Abdul Hakim, right? Do you know who Abdul Hakim is? Not the first question. I'm not that important. But like, that's how we do with the people. If you're from Philadelphia and, you know, oh, you, mashallah, used to pray in Sunnat Nabawi, or used to pray in, what's the one in Southwest? Dar al-Hadith, right? Or you prayed in Muqbil. Did you know so-and-so? Did you know, right? You recognize a person by way of his affiliations. Oh, you traveled to KC. Oh, you traveled to Michigan. Oh, you traveled here. So we figure out who you might have met by way of knowing where you're from and where you're at, and you know what your activity was. And so this is something that is recognized as well in the scholars of hadith, knowing their locations. I think that's it. I mean, scholars, how many of the scholars imitated other contemporary scholars in their own works and statements? We answered that. It was both the same statement. All the scholars from Medina know. نعم نسأل الله أن يتوب علينا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.